Well, welcome everybody. And this is a weekly forum hosted by the Indo-Caribbean Diaspora News. It's a free online newspaper dedicated to highlighting and discussing issues, events, and people mainly in the Indian diaspora, in the Caribbean and elsewhere. So you are free to write for the paper, send your letters, send articles and so on, which must not be more than 800 words, and we always like pictures, as any good newspapers would have. And this forum is held every Sunday at 7:30 Trinidad Atlantic time on a variety of current hot topics. We know that time is inconvenient for a number of people who live on the other side of the globe, but this is a forum is based in Trinidad, and the time and the days convenient to most of us. Please mute your microphone, which you would see as an icon on the left corner of your screen, because the background noise is often annoying, irritating, and distracting. So far, we are silent and we are going good. And I can't emphasize more that you need to mute your microphone only when you have to speak. We want to maximize the number of responses. So if you do not want to speak or you don't get the time to speak, there is the chat box. You see a chat box there. You can always type your question or comment or contribution. So this format tonight, as always, will take the form of a panel presentation. Each speaker will talk for 7 minutes, 7, S-E-V-E-N. And then when all of them have spoken, the floor will be open for your brief questions, comments, and contributions. The meeting would end about 9 p.m. or soon after, meaning that it would take about an hour and a half. Tonight's topic is race, religion, and ethnicity in Trinidad and Tobago in the August 10th, 2020 general elections. And being a plural society, of course, these variables would come into play and would be used and so on to win votes. There are a number of issues which have cropped up in the last few days dealing with race and even religion and so on. So we are going to have our first speaker, who is Dr. Indira Rampasar. It's always nice to have a woman on the panel, and she lectures at UWI in political science and international relations. So I ask each one of the speakers to time yourself, stop at 7 minutes. If you are not finished, you would have time during the Q&A. Okay, welcome, Dr. Rampasar. Unmute your mic and speak.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Mahabir. Can you hear me and see me?
Yes,
I just want to make
sure.
Okay, great. So I'm going to talk about all these dynamics. Ethnicity actually encompasses race and religion, and it also encompasses class. So I'm going to touch on all those topics briefly in the 7 minutes you have given me. I'll start with a little historical review. In 1956, we had two major political parties emerging in Tobago, as the two dominant ethnic groups embarked on a continuing contestation for political space. The result is that today, two parties, the People's National Movement and the United National Congress, are ethnically aligned, and the population is divided almost right down the middle, giving rise to race-based politics, which has historically dominated the landscape. Interestingly, while the PNM's base and its leader have always been Afro-Trinidadian, the inner circle in the cabinet at government level has been generally non-Afro. And this is the perpetual browse of Professor Selwyn Cudjoe, if we would recall, or if we read him. NJAC, which is the Afro-led party, has never joined forces with the Afro-based PNM, but with coalitions in which the Indo-based party played a primary role. That is the NER in 1986 and the People's Partnership in 2010. In a population of approximately 1.4 million, and that there was a CSO statistics 2011, I don't think we have anything more recent than that. Indo-Trinidadians constitute 35.4%, Africans 34.2%, mixed 18.4%, white 0.6%, and Chinese and other minority groups 1.2%. These statistics beg an interesting question. Why is it so difficult for the Indo-based party to secure victory at the polls as often as the Afro-based party, when this population is almost evenly divided along ethnic lines? I believe that one answer to this question lies not in the greatness of the PNM nor the frailties of the DLP, ULF, UNC, but rather in the parliamentary Westminster winner-takes-it-all political system, which divides the country into constituencies or seats. As a result, a party may win the highest number of votes, known as the popular vote, but would not form the government because it did not win the most seats. Indeed, a minority government could rise to power with less votes than the combined opposition parties, as had obtained in 2007. And that's when the PNM had won and the CP had split the votes. The result would be a number of safe ethno-based seats for each major party. The notion of safe seats is intricately linked to the ethnic pattern of voting and race-based politics. Safe seats emerge where the demographics and boundary delineation distinctly capture a particular ethnic enclave for either political party. Several factors could threaten the traditional safe seat strongholds, including third parties, coalitions, redrawing of the boundaries, house or voter padding, leadership, and candidates. And now touch on the concept of the marginal constituencies. In the US, these are known as swing or battleground states. When this occurs, some safe seats tend to become marginal. As the number of seats increase, so too does the number of marginals. In Trinidad and Tobago, the number of constituencies has progressively increased since the 1956 elections, when it numbered 24. This had risen to 34 in 61 and 36 in 1966, at which it stabilized until 2007, when it was increased to 41. Hence, the increase in the number of marginal constituencies to 10 in the 2010 general elections. In 2020, as I see it, there are possibly 8 marginals: La Joqueta, Talparo, Tanapuna, St. Joseph, San Juan Barataria, San Fernando West, Moruga, Tableland, and possibly Toco, San Grande, and Tobago East. Both elections, including this 2020 elections, are determined by traditional patterns of voting based on race, party affiliation, and opportunism, which are deeply ingrained in the political culture of the Trinbago electorate and are difficult to change. Incumbency and boundary demarcation are also significant. The ethnic factor is still very potent for both parties, as it actually determines the categorization of seats into safe and marginal. Party loyalties are also critical, as many older voters and their blood descendants are reluctant to switch allegiances. Moreover, there is always a percentage of self-interested voters across the ethnic divide who veer toward the party in power, as we call them PIPs, PIPs, because of financial and non-monetary gain like office, position, and prestige. It can be safely projected that both the PNM and the UNC will retain their bases in the safe seats, but the electoral contest will really be played out in the 8 marginal constituencies in 2020 elections. The ethnic card. Playing the race card entails a 2-level game with the dual objective of retaining the ethnic base on the one hand and courting the alternative ethnic or non-ethnic group on the other. The first strategy is relevant for both safe and marginal constituencies, while the second applies more to the marginals. The less educated masses are more likely to follow the tribe, and I don't mean to use that derogatorily, because the leaders look like them and ethnic identification directly related to phenotype. But educated middle-class supporters are also logically drawn to the fold, fearing that should the other rise to power, their tribe would be unrepresented or underrepresented and deprived of its share of the national pie. Thus, ethnic voting is not necessarily irrational.
It's pretty easier than making it. Because when you're making it, you have only standing and proportion.
Thus, ethnic voting is not necessarily irrational. Rather, it is a phenomenon which carries a rationale of its own and has characterized politics in multi-ethnic societies and countries around the world: Guyana, Suriname, Fiji, Mauritius, even the United States. I'll touch on the religious factor briefly. The UNC has traditionally attracted the majority of the Hindu vote and the PNM the Christian vote, mainly Catholics and Anglicans and some evangelical churches. Both parties have courted the Muslim and Presbyterian vote in the past. Under Eric Williams, many Muslims supported the PNM, but in 1995, when Trinidad and Tobago celebrated its 150th anniversary of Indian arrival, they tended to veer towards the UNC and remained with the party in the 2000 elections, which the UNC won. The Muslim vote is important in constituencies like San Juan Barataria and now Chaguanas East. In the past, it was important in Princestown. We will recall Amoy Mohammed winning that seat there. In 2020, the UNC continues to field a Muslim candidate in San Juan Barataria, Saddam Hussein, very famous or infamous name. But the PNM does not field a Muslim candidate, although it had done in the past. However, there seems to be some competition for the Muslim vote in 2020, which seems to be a split. A group of 25 Muslim organizations have banded together to support Prasad Bisesa and have begun to make inroads into marginal constituencies, lobbying Muslim constituents to support the UNC in the August 10th election. 3 Muslim organizations have distanced themselves from claims that the Muslim community has supported the UNC in this election. Shortly afterwards, 3 days ago, Prime Minister Rowley hastened to facilitate the signing of an MOU between Muslim leaders and the Princeton Regional Corporation for the establishment of a Muslim cemetery in state lands. ASTRA and the TML were part of the signing. The Presbyterian vote is important in San Fernando West. Both Muslims and Presbyterians strongly supported the COP in 2007. Interestingly, in 2020, neither party is fielding a Presbyterian candidate in San Fernando West. Al-Rawi actually said he is a 43rd descendant of the Prophet, although his mother may have some Presbyterian connections. The PNM has also attempted to court the evangelical vote. In March 2015, just before the elections, Rowley invited key representatives of the Trinidad and Tobago Council of Evangelical Churches to join him for a special prayer dinner to pray for the Prime Minister and by extension, the nation. Both the PNM and the UNC have courted the Baptist vote, but it was the UNC under Baldew Pandey which afforded them a holiday. Spiritual Baptist Day, and even had a Senator Barbara Burke in his government. The class factor. This is another critical factor in this election, that of class. Each party is trying to capture the middle class vote, which some believe is a floating vote concentrated in the marginals, and I don't know how accurate is that perception. It may not be quite accurate, as many middle class voters are already decided voters who also opt for either of the 2 major parties. It would be noteworthy to gauge the number of non-voters in the 2020 elections, because we always have about 35 to 40% people who don't vote, but we don't know exactly who they are. In conclusion, the 2020 elections will be keenly contested. It has attracted immense interest, including a number of small parties and numerous candidates across the ethnic, age, religious, and class divide. There are 5 candidates battling for St. Augustine, 7 for Tobago East, and 5 for San Fernando West. We may say that the electorate is spoiled for choice, no sarcasm intended. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rampesad. A very comprehensive analysis. I mean, you have almost said it all. So we wait to see what the other speakers would have to say. So I also want to make the point that the Express is doing a coverage of our discussions tonight, and that is very good. Our next speaker, who would speak for 7 minutes, like Dr. Rampesad, is Tony Fraser, well known in the media, being a print journalist, a broadcast journalist, and I think for me his claim to claim is being a former BBC Caribbean correspondent. So over to you, Tony. Unmute your mic and speak.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mahabir, and all your panelists. And as you said, Dr. Rampesad has said it all. And I don't intend to go along that road, because the history is well known of the racial and tribal politics of Trinidad and Tobago. But what I want to say really is to look at the same political, ethnic, racial development over the decades, going back to 1925, in that first election of sorts. To say that those elections or the racial voting patterns have really distorted the country, have really underdeveloped the country, have allocated resources in a way along ethnic lines, along racial lines, and not in the national interest. So I don't want to cover the history of ethnic and racial voting in the country. I want to say 2 things. We have to have constitutional. Dr. Rampesad touched on that very briefly. We have to have constitutional change in our institutional arrangements, and we have to have social and political change to move people from where they are. And let me make the point at the start that I'm not talking about bringing people together in in a notion of all we are one. I'm not at all. I'm saying that we have these differences in culture and religion and all of these things, and we should make use of them. With regard to constitutional development, we've talked about that for the period of independence after the initial constitution. We've talked about it from 1970 onwards, about getting a new constitution, getting new institutions which will reflect and determine how we utilize our resources, how we allocate the resources in the country, how we recognize the different ethnic and religious groups in the society, and guide us in that way in terms of how we choose representatives and how we choose government ministers. Very different from the system that we have now. The local government system that we've talked about for the last 20 years or so is something desperately needed to bring resources and power closer to the people. And if it's well known that in the local government arena, race does not have the kind of hold on the electorate as it does in the general election when the big power is up for grabs. I am saying that we have to look at the constitutional arrangements. Again, Dr. Rampasar talked about the winner takes all, and the opposition is left out in the cold, and therefore you have the bifurcation of the society into opposition, government, ethnicity, and race. And therefore we have to look at those fundamental issues about change. We have to look at this. Those are the legal areas, and there are lots of elements of it that we can talk about. And I'm not necessarily talking about the kind of government that, say, Guyana has. They are in very serious difficulties, although they have made some changes to the original systems that was left with them by the British. I'm talking now about the kind of changes that we have to have at the social, the human, and the political level to allow people to follow their race and religion and their cultural beings and so on, but not to have to clash with each other. If we look at village life in certain parts of the country, perhaps even more so 50 years ago than it is today, when people had common goals and common spaces that they shared and lived in without conflict. So I am not saying that all of us should, let me put it in the words of Satmaraj, I don't believe in Douglarization, although I'm a Douglar, but I say that people have to have their ethnicity, which is different from race, and their cultural beings, but they don't have to clash with each other in terms of getting them. When we talk about the political system that delivers the resources and the power in one Godhead, as it were, and that Godhead can purchase patronage along racial lines, along ethnic lines, we need to remove ourselves from those kinds of systems to develop the country, or allow the people of the country to develop in that way. Be said, but when we join the discussion, I'm sure that I'll have more to say on that score.
Thank you very much, Tony. We are not sure if we're going to have Dr. Vishnu Bisram joining us, because he is on the road driving in the United States, and he said if it's convenient, he will join us later. So we have to turn to Dr. WINFORD JAMES, who has retired from UWI, where he was a lecturer in language, originally from Tobago. He's well known in Trinidad as a political analyst. So over to you, Dr. James. Unmute your mic and speak.
Thank you, Dr. Mohammed. Let me start off by saying that I did not read the topic in relation to the August 10th election, although my comments might relate to what is going on in respect of that date. I think we have to determine what, can you see me, by the way?
We've seen a still, you have to put on your video because we see, right, okay. Yeah, good.
Right. Yes, so I'm saying there are different starting points, and the question is what starting point might be convenient here. Do we want the starting point to be the roots of race, religion, and ethnicity? That would mean we have to travel into the midst of time and parting them to get to the right portals of human genesis. We would have to refer to the findings and the guesses of paleontology, archaeology, and anthropology. But too much of our reconstruction would be left to faith and abstruse thinking than we have time for. So we're not going to go that route. A second starting point might be European colonization and its effects on the Americas and the Caribbean. We have a good sense of how Portugal, Spain, Britain, and France used discovery, conquest, slavery, strict indentureship at the behest of the crown and the church to enrich themselves with the economic resources of Africa, the Americas, the Caribbean, and India. We know how they introduced governance systems based on the notions of white superiority and supremacy as a consequence of the artificial or the superficial differences of race, ethnicity, skin color, religion, and superstition. We know how their schemes of social classification, all those schemes have institutionalized bias in the societies we live in today, in the governance systems, in the social systems, in the political systems. We know that the distribution of wealth in our societies that privileges white and other lighter skinned people is a direct result of a self-serving, unconscionable barbarism aided and abetted by the church. The effects are still with us today. And that's the second topic, but I think I will choose this one. The continuing exclusion of the mass of Indos and Afros from the wealth distribution scheme in Trinidad and Tobago. You know, every election time, every general election time, every local government election time, we have all the parties, but in particular, the major parties, UNC, PNM, coming for the votes of the people, of the electorate, in order to get them to form a government. But time after time, the people are left where they are with paying jobs, most of the wealth going to the 1%ers. I think Dr. Rampesad mentioned that they are 0.06% of the population. She may correct me if I didn't hear that right. But we know that the people who are wealthy in this country are not Afros, nor are they Indos. Although you do have Afros who are doing well, and you do have Indos who are doing well. But I don't want to focus on the people who are hardly enjoying the benefits of our considerable levels of wealth in this society. So the masses, as I said, are in low-paid jobs in both the public and private sectors, right? And apart from government, the wealthiest group of people, apart from government, the wealthiest group of people are the 1%ers. Now, what are some of the relevant characteristics of these 1%ers? Well, they are white. They are white in Trinidad and Tobago. They are Catholic. That's from the religious point of view now. They are highly influential in government and government spending. The Indo and Afro masses, they depend on government and the 1%ers for their standard of living. Okay, and what are their relevant characteristics? They are non-white. They are in the majority. In real terms, they don't own businesses. They don't own the wealth-creating businesses of this country. And they compete with each other for ownership of state resources via changes in government, but they only get the crumbs. So we fight amongst ourselves, Indos and Afros, who make up the majority of the population of the electorate. But what do we get in return? As I said before, we don't have businesses, by and large, not saying that they aren't Black and African and Indo people who don't have businesses, but by and large, we are not in the wealth creation business. And so the question arises is, why do we keep, if we don't benefit in the way that would be meaningful, why do we keep voting those two parties? Obviously, there is a cultural reflex, there's a political reflex that makes us do that. But it's time for us to have a different kind of conversation, more along the lines that Tony Fraser was going, I think. Yes, we have to have a conversation, not only on changing the Constitution, but having a way of doing things that involves not only the people in the Parliament, but civil society as a matter of course. We need to have hearings. We need to end a situation where the cabinet is in control of the Parliament. We need to have all of that change. So how do we become business owners? How do we become? Clearly, not by voting in either the PNM or the UNC. We have voted in the UNC twice, but Indos have not become wealthy. We have voted in PNM endless times. And some of the original problems that the PNM was created to solve remain, right? And our bone of contention, right? In terms of infighting, getting contracts here and there, but the quality of life has remained the same, has not been changed in any meaningful kind of way. So we don't become business owners, that is to say, owners of businesses that create wealth by either voting either the PNM or the UNC. We don't do that by following or let me just put it differently. I'm talking about how we might change that. And we change that situation by changing the follow the leader democracy that we have. If you go to the PNM and you listen to their platforms, you'll see that they are following Dr. Rowley. If you go to the UNC platform, you'll see that they are following Kamla Bissessar. They are following the leader. It's almost like a cult. What they do is like a worship of the leader. We can do that. Sources around the things that we are good at. A lot of Afros are good at the carnival arts, but they haven't made businesses out of it. And they haven't had government policy that facilitates their making businesses out of it, right? So we need to do that. And we need to produce wealth-creating industries within the carnival, the broader carnival arts industry. We need to move into a locally constructed bourgeoisie and align ourselves with middle-income earners in business ventures. We have to change the conversation about what we mean by being wealthy, about how government can benefit us, right? We can't continue to be privileging the 1%ers with our wealth or with the conditions of wealth. And we can't behave as if they are the only ones who have the ideas or the ability to do so. And we have to, as I said before, shift from the democracy of follow the leader and the gimme model to a model of participate in the governance after the vote, right? We've got to force government to use public policy to change the patterns of ownership and business creation. So when we start having that kind of conversation, we are focused on forcing our political systems or parties, when they get into power, to change the order of the day and to make us own businesses by public policy and by ourselves developing a different approach to improving our standard of living, then I think if we don't do those things, or when we do those things, it's the only way and the only time we will be making a substantial radical change in the way we govern ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. James. And it's good to have this other perspective. So we turn to our last speaker, Ravi Dev, who is Indian civil rights activist and former Guyana Member of Parliament. And we have brought him on the panel tonight to perhaps give us a theoretical framework of this entire race, religion, ethnicity dynamics, and also to make comparison to Guyana, because in many ways, Guyana is a reflection of Trinidad in terms of the politics. So over to you, Ravi. Unmute your mic and begin speaking.
Well, thank you, Dr. Kumar. I also accepted your invitation to be part of this panel to really learn, because as you know, we in Guyana, we are enmeshed in a very nasty descent into a place where we don't think Trinidad would ever want to be. But from what I have heard here, I'm reminded of what I think is called the Anna Karenina principle, which is that while happy families are all happy, unhappy families are unhappy each in their own way. So plural societies seem to be unhappy in each of their own way. From a Guyanese perspective, we have always looked at Trinidad almost as a model, in terms that the fact is that we both came out of the colonial experience around the same time. But while we descended into open violence between the ethnic groups, fairly similar, Trinidad did not go down that route. And we had always looked to Trinidad as to, well, what was the actual difference? In what way were they different, where they maintained at least legitimacy through elections? Because I read a quote once from Dr. Eric Williams, that early in the formation of the party structure, said moving from confrontation in the streets to, I guess, confrontation in parliament, depending on who has the majority, which is the way to go. So whatever unease I've heard here from the outside, speaking as a Guyanese, I think Trinidadians ought to be a bit more sanguine, at least they have not gone down this road to violence. Because once this genie of violence comes out of the bottle, it's almost impossible to put it back. I have returned after many years abroad to live in my native village, which is a mixed village. And after the 60s violence, Guyana became as segregated as South Africa. Very few communities, even in the small village I live in, the people do not live amongst each other. There are literal different sections of a particular village. And that is not how you will resolve these problems, because we don't get to experience the actual circumstances of the other. But I want to come back to what I have heard up to now to try to put it into the context of Guyana. Our first speaker talked about ethnic voting not being irrational. But our last speaker posed it as a question implying its irrationality. He asked, why do the poor, I'm paraphrasing it, why do the poor vote for their elites when they really don't benefit in the end? So which is it? Is ethnic voting rational or irrational, especially from the standpoint of the poor? Well, I think one of the variables that we have to take into consideration is the old biblical one that man does not live by bread alone. What we have found in the modern world, that this need to be somebody, as Jesse Jackson once said when I was living in America, that you have to be somebody. This imperative of what they call identity politics is something that has increased, and inevitably so. Because what we have to discover or accept is that the notion, as if one of the speakers talked about the national interest. I think it was Mr. Fraser. The thing is, though, that the national interest was defined at a time when particular groups, ethnic groups, held absolute political power, and even since then, particular groups held political power out of proportion to their numbers. It was therefore not based on the legitimacy of democracy. Case in point is in both Trinidad and Guyana. Initially, all these ethnic groups were dumped into these islands. In our case, we had indigenous peoples. But the point is, we were supposed to assimilate into a national culture that was defined by the Europeans. There was some modification. We talk about the Euro, Afro, Creole. But by and large, it was dominated by one particular group and one particular interest. Therefore, all other groups had to adjust themselves to that reality. In Trinidad, because the PNM, which comes from the Afro section, they had almost 40 years to define the Afro reality of Creole culture as the dominant reality. So that when, at long last, the demographics changed and Indians began to have the ability to demand we too should be part of this national culture, they were treated as somehow anti-nationalist because nationalism was defined outside of their experience. And that, to a great extent, is still the case in Trinidad and certainly in Guyana. The dominant reality then is that the Caribbean, by and large, is seen as an Afro-dominated civilization, so to speak. And all other groups are called ethnic groups in contraposition to this so-called national group. And that creates its own tension. It creates its own tension as I said, modern communication is increasing this tendency for us to be aware of our groups, even in the diaspora, as this particular, your group is doing, making us aware of the, for instance, in South Africa, the Indians of South Africa, all the Indians who have passed through the colonial experience, how different they are, not only from the Indians of India, but within where they are, how they're now relegated to being ethnic groups outside of the national culture. So to come back to this whole question, which I think is a fundamental one, is that we, while the poor or the less fortunate of the ethnic groups still cleave to their ethnic leaders, is because they are affirmed. I may be poor, there's a saying in Guyana, that I may be poor, I may eat salt and rice, but I will still support my leader. Because it gives them a sense of satisfaction. And it comes to a point we have to, again, unpack, which is that the individual identity is inextricably linked to group identity. So when a particular group is seen to be ruling, even though the person might not have gotten economic benefit, he gets a psychic benefit of being identifying with that group. I want to conclude or mention the dangers of that, however, because in Guyana, part of our problem was that the Indians constituted a majority. And when we came back to Guyana from our studies abroad, we posited two ethnic security dilemmas. That if Indians who were the majority voted as a bloc, Afro-Guyanese who literally slaved for Guyana will be excluded. And it was a dilemma. And because of that dilemma, African Guyanese gave Burnham a free pass when he rigged elections for 28 years because, hey, it made sense to them. It was logical. If he doesn't rig, we are going to be out of power, and they will be ruling. The Indian security dilemma was one way that even though they had the numbers, the levers of the state were were all controlled by their political opponents, whether it is the army, the police force, the National Guard, the bureaucracy, and most importantly, the power to disrupt any operations in Georgetown was all in the hands of their opponents. So while they may take office, to use a phrase of Dr. Jagan, they can never take power. So this was our own dilemma. But to come to the Trinidad experience where we are right now, in Guyana, we are now a nation of minorities. And one of our thinking, we had looked at Trinidad to say, well, they're a nation of minorities, and it is possible because each group is a minority and cannot get into office, much less power on their own. They have to reach across the divide, and in that way moderate not only their rhetoric, but moderate their policies to be inclusive. That was what we thought. And therefore, in fact, during this election, that's one of the positions that the group of which I am part has made, that basically we don't have to get to theories of power sharing and all of those, that maybe we are getting to a point like Trinidad, where as minorities we can reach across. But from what I have heard tonight, I'll conclude on this note, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that the ethnic imperative is just as strong in Trinidad, but it is just that it is not expressed. And I will be interested to hear what are the variables that make it not expressed as in Guyana. Thank you.
Thank you, Ravi Dev. So it's good to hear you giving that theoretical framework for all our discussions. So we want maximum participation. So the floor is open now. Make your questions short, and we expect the responses to also be short. So, you know, we can have a lot of discussion. So before you speak, if you can identify yourself, say what country you're from, and unmute your mic and speak. Yes, anybody?
Yeah, Kumar, may I start?
Yeah, sure.
Right, my first question is to Indira Rampasar. She said that there is a Muslim presence in Chaguanas East. I happen to live in that in that constituency. Exactly where is that Muslim presence? So that's because I think that the Muslim community has a way of making themselves, they are few in numbers, and for whatever reason, we always feel that where there are a few Muslims, that they have a large presence. All right, I would like to comment on that. Tony Fraser talk about bringing people together, but the UNC has sacrificed its cultural identity. Yesterday I was home, again I live in Chaguanas, and that Friday, and they were on a motorcade going to register. I was listening to Jamaican dub music. I listened to soca. It seems that the UNC is embarking that in order to get national unity, they have to give up their identity. You ask a UNC,
Okay.
I will spell it out for you.
Okay, go ahead.
He's not clear on that. So I would like to.
Your internet seems to be unstable, Dul, but I think we have heard most of what you said. So, Dr. Rampasar, do you want to respond? Unmute your mic.
Yes, thank you, Kumar.
Yeah.
Well, basically, we have been hearing a lot about the ISIS movement there, the gang presence, which is a Muslim presence. And we hear a lot about this in the news. And also Minister Karim recently spoke about the Muslim presence in Chaguanas as well. So this is where I get it. Now, this is not to deny that we have a Muslim presence throughout Trinidad and Tobago. In every constituency, we will find a Muslim presence. But remember, I was strictly speaking in the context of electoral politics and constituency politics. And I was saying that that can possibly impact religion can possibly impact, and certainly it has in Sawa Bharat area. That's why the party, and particularly the UNC, has fielded a Muslim candidate in the past. We noticed that the PNM veered away from that in this election by choosing a young Afro candidate, a popular DJ. How that will play out, it will be interesting to see. But we noted also that Fuad Khan, Dr. Fuad Khan, who's been the representative for a long time for Sawa Bharat area, endorsed the candidate, the UNC candidate. And I think part of that was to ensure that the Muslim vote come forward for the UNC. So in terms of Chaguanas East, to identify exactly where they are, I wouldn't be able to say exactly where they are, because that was his question, but I believe that there is that presence and there is the perception, and certainly Minister Karim thinks this because I've heard him say it, I've had conversations with him about it, that the Muslim presence is very important in Chaguanas East. Thank you.
Okay, so anybody again wants to ask a question, comment?
Can I respond to
Yes,
what
sure, Tony.
Yeah, the person was talking about political coming together. I was not talking about that. We have attempted that on 3 or 4 occasions previously. And those attempts at coalitions have not worked because they have been political in nature, with politicians jostling for power and seeking best allocate seats along the lines of each party. I've been talking about social transformation. I'm talking about the people kind of transformation, about appreciating each other's culture and developing along those kinds of lines. I'm not talking about political coming together at all, because the politicians, the political parties have distorted the reality for their own purposes.
Thank you. Any question from anybody in the audience?
Yeah, Kumar, can you hear me?
Yes, Dr. Tara Singh.
Yeah, my question is, there are 3 variables that seem to play a great role in Trinidad politics: race, class, and religion. I would like to know which is more important, or is a combination of all 3? Can anybody answer that?
Anybody on the panel?
Since I addressed it, I will try. I would think ethnicity is the most important factor. I think it defines the safe seats, which are the majority of seats. I did discuss that. So the majority of seats which are considered safe seats for either party. And I also mentioned that they're basically concentrated in certain geographical enclaves throughout the country. So you would have PNM safe seats and UNC safe seats. And after that now, when they've settled that, they then focus on the marginal constituencies, in which all 3 of these factors will also play critical roles: class, ethnicity, and race. Like I said, we cannot discount the race factor in the marginal constituencies, and we should not also assume that it's just undecided floating voters that are there, because there are many decided voters of either ethnic group, both ethnic groups, in the marginal constituencies as well. I hope I have answered it, but I really do think that race is the main factor.
Okay, I have a follow-up question, Kumar, if you allow me.
Can you come back on that question? We have the esteemed Dr. David Debydeen, who has a question or comment. Go ahead, doctor.
Yeah, thanks very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, clearly.
Oh, good, yeah. All I wanted to say, well, first of all, thank you for allowing me to participate in this. I'm only a literary critic and a writer. It's nice to hear from, it's nice to hear from historians and sociologists. This year is the 40th anniversary of the assassination of Walter Rodney. What can we learn about Walter Rodney in relation to our predicament? What can we learn from him? How can we go forward using Rodney's ideas?
Okay, I'm sure Ravi Dev would respond to that, and then we'll come back to Tara Singh if nobody has a question otherwise. So Ravi, you'd want to respond to him?
If I might, okay, if I might to answer David's question. Rodney was a critical presence in Guyana, who I think made one of the most decisive intervention in Guyana to address some of the same questions posed here 40 years after his death. It's still on the agenda. And to me, that is the great tragedy, as great as possibly his assassination. And the question he posed was that in all of these things he has discussed, the nature of race, the construction of race socially, the place of the African worldwide, and because he was a Pan-Africanist, but situated the position of the African in the Caribbean within that. But his main contribution from a Guyanese perspective and from a Caribbean perspective did not exclude the Indian from his concerns, unlike many vulgar Marxists, and he was a Marxist. He tried to grapple with this problematic of ethnicity within that Marxist framework. And I would like to feel that what he proposed was that we need to look at all groups, however they define themselves. And we have to investigate impartially their integration into the power structure. And the moment they are not integrated into the power structure in an equitable manner, whatever the lines of differentiation are, gender, class, race, ethnicity, sex, whatever it is, if they're not integrated into power relations in an equitable manner, then you will have problems, because inevitably those people will discern that oppression and they will not only attack it, but what we're seeing here, acquire the methodology to acquire it. Black Lives Matter didn't just erupt like that, it was there, but they got a vocabulary at a particular time and you begin to fight it. So come back to Walter's contribution. I think we don't have to shy away from ethnicity. We should not. Walter described himself as a proud Pan-Africanist, a proud Caribbean man, a proud Guyanese, and in each of those things, there doesn't need to be contradiction. What we have proposed in line with Walter's thinking is that in each of these communities, there must be what you call ethnic impact statements. If we believe that, for example, the environment is good to protect and it's a social good for everybody, well, you have an environmental protection, you have environmental impact statements. You know how things worked out when you embark on a policy. The same thing we should do for ethnicity, because after the governmental policy is unleashed, it will be examined from an ethnic standpoint, because as Indira and every other speaker has said, that's the prime imperative in the Caribbean. And that is where we'll stop on the Walter Rajden thing. I want to make a comment, if I might, on what one speaker talks about. Again, I think it was, or journalist friend talks about the kind of coalitions. No, I think it was our second speaker. The coalitions, because you have several types of coalitions. And our Guyanese experience, I want to pass it on to you in Trinidad. They are what you call coalitions of convenience, and then you have coalitions of commitment. In Guyana, the government that is presently hanging on to power went into a coalition of convenience simply to oust the PPP. They were not united on any platform that went to the fundamental contradictions of the society, for example, ethnicity and class or any other divisions. They simply went to get out that. And I think this is what you're seeing or probably playing out in Trinidad. And coalitions of convenience will always end badly because they're not committed. Now, coalitions of commitment is what we're talking about. If we want to address the ethnic question, we have to talk about equity. We talked about people forming jobs in Guyana. There's a stereotype that Afro-Guyanese really are not good at business. I don't know where it came from, but it's there, and even they believe it. So we need to attack that. I'll let it go at this point. Thank you.
Okay, anyone present? Yes, yeah.
Can I say something about?
Yes, sure.
But I would like to suggest that be memorialized by some organization having an annual lecture series or a biennial conference on his work and his ideas. That's all I would like to say about memorializing him. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll probably come back to. Okay, Devanand Bhagwan, yes?
Yeah, hi. I'm from Guyana. I'm living in Toronto right now. I'd like to address a question about politics and religion, specifically talking about evangelical Christians. I'm a little bit confused why Indian-based parties, such as the PPP in Guyana and I imagine the UNC in Trinidad, why do they not appeal to evangelical Christians, especially those of Indian descent? I'm an evangelical Christian, proud to say that. We do have a very high-profile person in Guyana, Bishop Edgell, who is a solid evangelical Christian, but we do not have any Indians who publicly support. I'm talking about those who have status, who have power, who have leadership. They say, I support the PPP, and which is really unfortunate because they are a sizable bloc. I'm talking about Indian evangelical Christians. It's a growing group, and I think it's really prudent to include people from this group.
Okay, any of the panelists, and then Dr. Patricia has a question. Yeah.
Dr. Mahavir?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, Anthony.
Yes,
yes, Anthony Gonzales here.
Yeah.
Yes. No, I wanted to say that I tend to be a bit more realistic in the sense that I see ethnicity and race as something that doesn't go away very easily. It stays around for centuries, and I think we have, in a sense, to start from that reality. I've looked around the world, and I can tell you, up to today, for instance, the Scottish and the British are still warring after 400 years, and I've seen this all throughout Europe. And what I want to say here is that what we have to look for is really the extent to which these societies develop a certain kind of fluidity. That is to say, there is a certain kind of movement, a certain kind of flexibility that allows us to function in a certain way. And that is really the difference I see between Trinidad and Guyana and Trinidad and some of the other rural societies. I think if you start from the idea that there's race, which is a phenotypical, a physical thing that you define as race, and within race you have ethnicities. You have ethnicities defined in terms of religion, language, nationality, and so forth. So for instance, you would say, for example, that within the so-called Afro race, people from Tobago is an ethnicity. That is to say that they have a kind of nationality, a culture and difference and so forth. Similarly, within the Indo community, you have different types of religions and so on. And this is why I think Lloyd Best used to talk about the 9 tribes, which is to say he broke it down into these various ethnicities, and he tried to understand how are they evolving. Are they going into more flexibility, or are they going to less flexibility? Which are the groups that are likely to move away from the race factor in particular circumstances more than others? For instance, as we saw, for example, historically, Muslims, Christians, and so forth, Indians, they move to a certain extent and then they move back and so forth. Groups keep moving back and forth depending on their interest. And this is where Trinidad becomes interesting. No one group has a majority, and you have to kind of work for some kind of, it could be formed within the party or it could be formed outside of the party. But the fact of the matter is that you have to get that coalition to be able to allow you to win. And so that what is of interest to me is the extent to which Trinidad has been growing in that kind of diversity, which makes elections more interesting. Today we have more marginal seats than we have years ago, so it means the contestation is greater, and you have to fight in these marginal seats to win an election. And I think that gives us a certain kind of advantage. And this is where I think we are interesting as a society, which is to say that you don't have that kind of dominance by one particular group, and we have to kind of coalesce in a certain way in order to be able to exist. And it makes the politics very interesting. For instance, nobody can predict this coming election. We don't know how Tobago may go, and if it may take away the 2 seats from the PNM. We don't know how St. Joseph, Tunapuna, Moruga, I think Dr. Rampasar just mentioned them, the various marginal constituencies. There's about 8 of them. None of us here can really predict how they may go. And I think that is interesting in Trinidad. You know, of course, there will be safe seats, and they will be there for a while. It will take over time, and gradually they are changing. What was safe probably 5 or 10 years ago, it may not be safe today. So that over time, these things are changing. I think that is something interesting that we must look at. I don't think that, you know, overnight you're not going to change the ethnic or racial structure of the society to an extent that you would get 2 groups who are uniting to fight some other group or something like that. I'm not sure if that is workable. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Gonzales. We before we move to Debydeen, we had Dr. Patricia Mohammed wanted to ask a question, and then we'll come to you, Roger. After Debydeen, then Roger. Yes, Patricia, unmute your mic.
Right, I'm on. Thank you, Noor, and thank you to the panelists. And I have disclosure, I am not a political scientist. I find politics very messy and I try to stay out of it. So my entry point is, I try to stay out for the purposes of sanity. But so my entry point is really perhaps where Tony Fraser is coming from, the realm of ideas and ideologies which lead to discourses that shape how people behave. And, you know, we inherited this notion of assimilation, the idea that we will all assimilate in the Caribbean, whether we were Black or white or Indian or whatever, into this mix, the taxonomy into, and the idea of enlightenment would lead to progress and progress first, so that we would all assimilate. And what Tony is suggesting is that ethnicity and race and how people hold fast to the way in which they are loyal to that is actually so embedded in us that we need to be able to keep that without having to apologize for it. So my question is, Trinidad, and I like the point that Ravi Dev made, Trinidad so far has been very fortunate in not having ethnic cleansing. This is, if one opens that Pandora box, it is not a you know, place one should go, and there's still the hope of redemption. Now, I've spent a long time in Ireland, and there, the question is not race, but religion. And they're similar, and there's been very, very serious battles. So wherever you put groups together, they clearly are going to find ways of dividing and ruling. But still going back to the question of Trinidad, and this may appeal to the other speakers, but I certainly think Tony is coming along those lines. If we began with a discourse and ideology that starts us to divide on the basis of race and ethnicity, and that keeps being the divide and rule, the way in which that is a consistent part of our political dialogue. How do we change these discourses? Because ideologies in the end are the ones that are dominant, and they shape how we think, how we behave. They become part of our lifeblood. And if we were to attempt to see ethnicity and race differently, that whole discourse in the way it has been shaped, perhaps there's hope for us here. Now, I hope that I have not spoken nonsense, because I said I'm not a political scientist, but I really like to think all these things from maybe different tangents. So thank you.
Okay, so the panelists will address you. Let's, Roger has his hand up, and then we come back to David, and I know Dr. Tara Singh also wanted to ask a question, and anybody else. We have about 10 minutes again.
So thank you for the chance to raise a question. I was a little surprised to hear WINFORD say that there was not wealth distribution. In fact, I think, and I hope he's hearing, that the problem was too much rent dispersion. One of the reasons that we have this strong trust and part of the reason for the political divide, certainly after 2000, is because of the energy rents from the energy sector. So, like Patricia, I come from an economic background, and I hear some of these comments, and and some of my economic antennas go up. To me, Winford, I would like you to explain why you seem to think that there weren't wealth creation and there is a concentration of wealth in the hands of the 1%. Now, I'm not saying that the 1% does not own significant amount of businesses, but we have seen via GATE, for example, significant amount of Indians and Africans become professionals in many different ways. They went abroad and whatnot. So there was a transformation of the Indo and African population because of the way rent was dispersed. And in so doing, the dispersion of rents helped some of the new professionals to create rents. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's the way I see it.
Okay, Dr. James, briefly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. I like the question. As I said in my statement, it's not that you don't have Indos or Afros who are creating businesses. And there are some professionals who do. But they are a drop in the bucket in my judgment, and from reading the research, they are a drop in the bucket. I am talking about getting to the ascending heights. I am talking about the supporters of UNC or PNM not being satisfied with CPEP and URP salaries, if you can call them wages. I'm talking about the base, the base of the Indos and the base of the Afros getting into business activities rather than into low-paying jobs. Yes? And I even talked about the need to have an alliance between the professionals, the middle-income earners, and the business people. So I don't think there has been much movement of the supporters of either the PNM or the UNC in that regard. But I am not denying, I don't think Roger is saying that by the way.
Yeah, some internet problems Dr. James may have.
Improvement, and so on.
Okay.
But that figure is very small. I hope Roger has a clearer sense of what I was saying.
Yes, I don't want to spend time responding. What I would do is I have a graph that I plotted that could show the distribution of income, and I would share that with you after Winford. So let somebody else.
Okay.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So
may I say something here?
Yes, quickly.
Yeah. I want to direct this to Dr. James. Dr. James, I'm certain he's familiar with Trevor Sudama and his writings. So Trevor Sudama put together his articles from the Express in a book form. And the title is The Political Uses of Poker. He wrote about Africans wielding a lot of economic powers in the state enterprises. All right, they control flour mill, tea and tech, WASA, UTC, you think about it. And so when he says that black people are not there and the 1% controlling the economy and so on, Trevor Sudama said he does not agree with that black people have economic power.
Okay.
Yes, Dr. Mahabir.
You want me
yes,
to come?
Yeah. Briefly, Dr. James, and then somebody wants to ask a question.
I'll try to be brief.
Yeah.
I am not saying that you don't have African people in control of these enterprises, but that's not wealth creation. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the kinds of business that the 1%ers get involved in. I'm also talking about the creating businesses out of the things that you have created and you are interested in. The creative arts, the carnival industries and so on. And I'm saying that there is a need an urgent need for public policy to support Africans and Indos who want to move out of those kinds of jobs into creating wealth for themselves and others around them. That's different from what Trevor Sudama is saying. Thank you.
Okay, so let me respond.
Can I just make one quick point
Yes,
on
yes,
that
Tony, because I also want to
agree with Winford on his point. And I just have an example. Shagaramas, one of the first major industries, not a rail industry, producing industry, an entertainment industry has cropped up in Shagaramas, a place that was fought for by the blacks of Trinidad and Tobago, and I'm saying it like that, along with very significant Indians in the People's National Movement. Who owns that plot of land that has been converted into an entertainment center? One person from the 1%ers.
Right, okay, so I know
Yes, Dr.
people, okay, go ahead, because I want to respond.
I just wanted,
Dr. Gonzales.
Yeah, let me just add, let me just add that I think what is of interest in Trinidad here is that you have the growth of religious diversity. Just think about it. We have about 8 different religions here, and more you see people moving away from the traditional religions and going into new forms of religion and so forth. And what that is doing is that it's introducing a certain kind of citizen who has a different kind of outlook, and that citizen is likely to change and shift party focus and party loyalty and so forth. In addition to that, you have the traditional factors like education, industrialization, geographical mobility and so forth. That is also changing the loyalty of people. So that when I look at Trinidad, what I see really is that you have about 30% more, the core people who vote race, for instance, they are getting smaller and smaller. I think somebody, I think it was one of the pollsters in the country, last time he mentioned that there was about 30% of Afro-Trinidadians that are now becoming sort of swing voters. I think you can see a similar thing happening in the group. I think these are developments which I think we need to watch and we need to monitor and to see to what extent it is influencing the politics. This is why I'm saying that more and more elections are becoming very difficult to predict here because the society is becoming more and more diverse and we are not necessarily cast in a strict kind of racial mode which don't allow us to get out. So that while I understand that the difficulties of race politics and ethnic politics and so forth, to me, if at the same time, I appreciate how difficult it is to get out of these things when I look at societies across the globe. And I try to understand basically how are we at the margin moving out of this. And I think that the society is making progress to some extent.
Right. So we are at the tail end, and I just want to make a comment on my own to the question that has been raised about blacks in business and so on and wealth creation. You know, there is the phrase hiding in plain sight. And we have this stereotype that blacks are not into business, they are not into wealth creation, they are not the millionaires and billionaires of the society. But in Trinidad and Tobago, we forget to look at the credit unions. They are controlled largely by the blacks, and their assets run into billions. We must also not forget the churches, the evangelical churches, are also owned, controlled, and managed by the blacks, largely. So that's the point I just wanted to make, and I think Dr. Debydeen and somebody else, Tara Singh probably, and then we'll take one question again and we'll close. So Debydeen had his hand up. Just unmute and speak, please. David, are you there? David? Okay, Tara, go ahead.
Yes, moderator, can you hear me?
Yes, we're hearing you.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, given that Walter Rodney's, coming back to Rodney's life and his writings point us to real and pragmatic and practical solutions to racial and ethnic divisions in the Caribbean, which is, of course, why he was assassinated. Why don't we have the next Zoom meeting specifically on Rodney's proposals for solutions to our predicaments today? Why don't we just have a full Zoom meeting on Rodney?
Yes, but we must do that in the context of Trinidad and Tobago elections, which is just a few weeks away. We must do it in the context of Guyana, that is still to declare a winner. We must also.
I agree. But I think Rodney's ideas and solutions are also applicable to Trinidad.
Yes, that can be
not just
embedded.
Guyana.
That can be
So
embedded.
let us decide to do a full, honest appraisal of Rodney and his ideas and the way his ideas can move us forward.
Point taken, but I have to run that to my committee. This is a team effort. It's not me alone who runs this program.
I know.
So we
Thank
have
you.
to do that. Yeah. Tara Singh had something briefly. Yeah.
Yeah, Kumar, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. My question is.
Allow me to just comment on the.
All right, James. Yes. Okay.
I'm a credit union president.
Yeah.
So I just want to know that, and part of what I do is to help people who are credit unionists create wealth by the way we pool and distribute our resources. You may wish to hold a Zoom meeting on how credit unions are contributing to wealth creation in Trinidad and Tobago. I will be happy to be a part of that and bring you data.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Dr. Singh, Tara Singh.
Yeah, Kumar. Now, the issue I have is, the question is race-aligned voting necessarily a bad thing? Because people form political alliances based on race, tribe, religion, ideology, etc. Like in America, you have the Democrats, you have the Republicans, etc. If it's not race, it can be religion or something else. But what bothers me the most is when we can talk about race-aligned or class-aligned or religion-aligned voting, what's happened to policies? Are we so dark that people cannot appeal to policies as well? We have a good case in Guyana in 2015, when over 20% of the support base of the PPP swung to the PNC because of policy shifts. So I do not buy into this idea that race or religion will bind us. If you have good programs, good policies, people are becoming smarter and they will respond to it, though not readily. It will take some time, but we have seen examples from Guyana recently. That's my comment. If everybody want to
right, thank you. So we have did somebody have yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Dr. Rampasad.
Yeah, so I don't think anyone is promoting the race alignment voting. And he asked if we cannot have both. I think we do have both. But I think, John Mearsheimer, who is a famous political scientist, said that ethnicity is the most potent force in political science. It trumps. It's a primordial instinct, one would say, that something is irrational, and I did say that it carries a rationale of its own, but it tends to trump these other issues because we notice all the politicians are currently on the campaign trail and the hustings are talking about issues, economic issues, performance, it's all there. But sometimes it gets drowned in the midst of the whole ethnic debate. The other issue I want to raise is the issue of constitutional reform, which was discussed by Tony Fraser. The UNC, or the People's Partnership, had brought that proposal to the Parliament in 2010, in their reign between 2010 and 2015. And I think it got passed in the lower house and the upper house. When it came back to the lower house, it couldn't move. And of course, couldn't go for presidential assent. But they were talking about the right of recalling non-performing MPs. They were talking about fixed day elections and other aspects of constitutional reform, but it didn't get past the Parliament. So the issue of evangelical votes and why do the Indo and Afro parties not court them more? We have to keep in mind evangelicals generally deviate from these religions, the Hindu-based Indo party and the Catholic or Anglican-based Afro party, and therefore they do not wish to associate with them. So even if the parties try to get them in, it will be a very, very difficult task to get the evangelicals in there, because in many respects they left the religion because in some cases they see Hinduism as Hindus as idol worshippers or heathens, whatever. I don't know how they view the mainstream Christian religions, but they left those religions, and to return to their parties, I think they would have an issue with that. So that is probably why.
I would like to respond to that, if you don't mind.
Quickly.
Yes, I'll be very fast. I was a Hindu. I can say I'm a Hindustani Christian. All right, and I do embrace Hindustanism, and also I support the PPP party. Just very briefly, that's all I have to say for now.
Okay, thank you. So we'd have probably one new.
Can I have one final?
Yes,
yeah.
Tony.
I've been writing in my column, my Sunday Guardian column, almost religiously, talking about people involvement, moving people off the margins and out of the control of politicians, not merely control, but manipulation of politicians and political parties. And until the mass starts getting, and incidentally, that was one of Rodney's big arguments, until the mass starts getting involved in a meaningful way, we are going to continue going down the road of being manipulated by politicians and political parties.
Right. So we'd have we want a new face, a new voice. If you have a question, a comment, if you haven't gotten the opportunity, do so now. Unmute your mic and speak. Okay. So right. So Ravi Dev, as a discussant, I'll ask you to have the final comment, and then we will close for the night until next week. No, you have to unmute you. Right, go ahead now.
Thank you. Well, like I said, I entered this discussion to learn about what's going on in Trinidad. And I think my takeaway from what you've said is that ethnicity is still kicking very strong in Trinidad. And I happen to believe, as I think our main speaker said, this is a global phenomenon, that ethnicity, even in the very beginning of the Western Enlightenment, the growth of liberalism, it was pushed by ethnics, the whites. They were an ethnic group, but because they universalized their culture, we thought that was a given and we did not question it. We are in a particular phase of history where even those premises are being questioned, where, for example, in America or in Britain or in France, that consensus has broken down. So what it is to be an ethnic, a white ethnic, is now on the agenda. So I think the takeaway is that ethnicity is here to stay, and it is not as if it's a concession to some evil. I think it's the nature that the universe is diverse and we humans are diverse, and our challenge is to how do we deal with that diversity? In Trinidad, from a political standpoint, from Guyana here, what we saw is that from the very beginning, Trinidad was a nation of minorities, and the one variable between Trinidad and Guyana, Trinidad had a very large non-African, non-Indian group, which was in the French Creole group, and they were very powerful economically from the very beginning, and they had an input into the political system, which we believe helped to moderate it somewhat. So it was not as intensely bipolar as in Guyana. The other point I want to make, when we talk about constitutional reform, we have heard about this, and I hear more and more in Trinidad, heard Bastille Pandey, for instance, talk about this, that Guyana is an object lesson in terms of constitutional reform. That you can reform your constitution, you can redesign your institutions any which way, but if you don't have individuals who will be in those institutions that do not adhere to some basic moral values, that do not see that the society as a moral endeavor, then no matter what you have, it will be destroyed, and that is what we are experiencing in Guyana today. So I would say for Trinidadians, that we're speaking about this election in August 10th, that the electorate and all of us who are involved, especially you in Trinidad, must insist upon a kind of politics, that while politicians, they talk about politics and religion, don't mix. I hope they don't think that politics and morality can't mix. There has to be an essential morality in politics, that you are working for the greater good. What is that greater good? And this is the sticking point, that all of the various groups as they define themselves must be allowed to have their input to decide that greater good, and that the political system, therefore, will be able to deliver to each group as they define themselves power in all its forms, equitably, be it social, political, and most importantly, cultural. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. It's a little over 9 now, so we want to close. Thank you all for taking the time, making the effort to be in this meeting. So we will continue next Sunday, same time, 7:30, and we have yet to decide on our topic. I am directed by Dul Hanuman, who is the director of this Zoom meeting. We may want to bring in Dr. Raymond Ramcharita, as someone suggested. We may want to probably talk about Suriname, that has just sworn in a new government and a new president. So thank you all for participating. Remember our newspaper, online newspaper, Indo-Caribbean Diaspora News. You can contribute to it and read it and share it. It's free of charge. Thank you all, and have a good night.